Behind the golden doors of the royal palace, the people who lived there were not kings or queens. They were the ones who awoke before dawn and disappeared long after nightfall. Tonight, we begin a journey into a world that exists in the quiet spaces between the marble columns of history. We're going back to a time when the night wasn't just a period of rest, but a carefully constructed ritual of physical and social survival. We are going to step beneath the grand staircases, away from the velvet and the crowns, and into the cold, damp stone of the servants' quarters. Before we dive into the dim light of the palace's hidden corridors, I would love it if you just take a moment to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. It truly helps these stories reach those who need a bit of quiet in a loud world. And I'm curious, where are you right now? And when are you listening? Are you tucked away in bed, or perhaps watching the rain against a window in a city far away? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and they mean a lot to me. Now, settle in. Let's talk about the world before the sun. It is 3:30 in the morning. Outside the palace gates, the world is a void of ink and frost. The great oaks in the park are silhouettes against a moon that is beginning to fade. But inside the stone walls, in the belly of the beast, the silence is breaking. In a crowded attic room, a small bell rings. It's not a musical sound. It's a sharp, metallic tug that cuts through the dreams of a dozen young men and women. They sleep on narrow pallets of straw, shoulder to shoulder. There is no privacy here. Only the collective breath of the exhausted. Imagine the sensation of leaving a warm blanket for the biting air of a stone room with no fireplace. The floor is ice under your feet. You don't speak. In the servant's world, speech is a luxury for the daytime. In the morning, you are a machine. You pull on coarse wool stockings, a heavy apron, and shoes that have been muffled with cloth. Because the most important rule in the palace is this: the king must never hear you exist. As you descend the back staircase, a narrow, winding spiral of stone, the smell begins to change. Upstairs, the palace smells of dried lavender and expensive beeswax. But down here, it smells of coal dust, lye, and the damp scent of the earth. The kitchen is the first heart to beat. Long before the first royal eye opens, the scullery is a hive of motion. Imagine a fireplace so large you could park a carriage inside it. It never truly goes out. A turnspit boy has been sitting there all night, staring into the embers, making sure the heat is ready for the morning's baking. Can you hear the sound of the heavy copper kettles hitting the iron hooks? Clink. Hiss. The water begins to groan as it reaches a boil. Thousands of gallons of water must be heated. Every basin, every bath, every cup of tea, it all begins with a single person hauling a bucket from a deep, black well in the courtyard. Their muscles ache before the sun has even touched the horizon. Now, move with me up the hidden service stairs. These are the arteries of the palace, hidden behind the wallpaper and the tapestries. While the royals sleep in their four-poster beds, servants are moving like ghosts through the walls. The fire lighter is perhaps the most important ghost of all. He carries a bucket of hot coals and a bundle of kindling. He enters the royal bedchamber while the prince or the duchess is still snoring. He must be silent as a shadow. If he clatters a coal, if he sneezes, he could be dismissed without pay. He kneels on the hearth. He blows gently on the embers. Whoosh, whoosh. Can you see the orange glow reflecting in his tired eyes? He creates the warmth that the royals will take for granted when they wake up. To them, the room is simply always warm. They never see the man who knelt in the dark to make it so. While the fires grow, the housemaids begin their war against the dust. In a world of candlelight and coal, everything is covered in a fine layer of soot by morning. They use heavy brushes and beeswax. They scrub the marble on their knees. Think about the physical toll on the human body, the callousness of the skin, the permanent ache in the lower back. And yet, they are surrounded by the most beautiful things in the world. Gold leaf mirrors, silk curtains from the Orient, paintings that cost more than a servant would earn in 10 lifetimes. They touch these things every day, but they do not own them. They are merely the caretakers of a beauty they aren't allowed to enjoy. By 6 a.m., the tension in the palace shifts. The great clock in the courtyard strikes the hour. The pace quickens. The valets and ladies' maids are preparing the clothes. They are ironing silk with heavy metal irons filled with hot coals. They are polishing silver brushes. This is the hour of the sacred ritual. The dressing of a queen is not just putting on clothes, it is a performance. Layer after layer of linen, corsets, petticoats, and silk. The maid stands behind her mistress, pulling laces tight, pinning jewels into place, holding her breath. Often, the queen will talk to her maid as if she were a piece of furniture, or perhaps a pet. She might confess a secret, or complain about the king. The maid listens, but her face remains a mask. She is the keeper of the palace's most dangerous secrets, and she knows that her silence is her only protection. What did they think about, these men and women, as they watched the sunrise through the small, barred windows of the basement? Did they feel pride in the grandeur of the house? Or did they feel like prisoners in a gilded cage? There is a story of a young footman who once said that he forgot what his own voice sounded like, because he spent 18 hours a day in a world where he wasn't allowed to speak. He only heard the bells. The bells. That constant, demanding jingle from the wall that told him he was needed upstairs. As the first golden rays of the sun finally hit the palace spires, the invisible army retreats. The heavy work is done. The fires are roaring, the breakfast is laid out on silver platters, the floors are gleaming. The servants slip back into the shadows, into the pantries, into the narrow hallways. When the king finally opens his eyes, he sees a perfect world. He sees a world where everything is effortless. He doesn't see the soot on the firelighter's hands. He doesn't see the red, raw skin on the laundry maid's arms. He doesn't see the boy who has been awake for 4 hours just to ensure the water in the wash basin is exactly 100 degrees. History remembers the names of the people who wore the crowns. But the palace, the physical building, it was kept alive by the breath of the people in the shadows. They were the heartbeat of the stone. They were the ones who conquered the night, so the royals could enjoy the day. The world is waking up now. The quiet of our story is coming to a close. But as you go about your day, or as you drift off into your own sleep, remember those silent footsteps in the dark. Remember that behind every great luxury, there is a human story of labor, silence, and resilience. Sleep well. Stay curious. The sun has finally climbed above the horizon, casting long, golden fingers across the palace gardens. But beneath this veil of morning splendor, a vast and complex machine is already in full motion. This machine is not made of gears or steam. It is made of human bone, muscle, and breath. They were known as the Silent Army, a nameless legion of men and women who moved like shadows through the gilded halls. Running a royal palace was not merely a job, it was a feat of invisible engineering. It was a city within a city where hundreds of people lived and died, yet their presence was meant to be entirely unfelt by those they served. Tonight, we are going to step behind the velvet curtains. We are going to explore how a royal household was secretly governed, and how a hierarchy of silence maintained the illusion of effortless majesty. The palace was a labyrinth designed to keep two worlds from ever truly meeting. While the royals walked through wide, sunlit galleries, the Silent Army moved through a network of secret arteries. These were the service stairs. Narrow, winding, and perpetually cold. A servant was trained from a very young age to walk with a specific gait. They learned to place their weight on the balls of their feet so that the floorboards would not groan. They were taught to press their bodies against the stone walls if a royal passed, becoming as still as the statues in the niches. This army had its own generals, its own strict laws. At the top stood the house steward or the Lord Chamberlain. He was the architect of the silence. Every morning, he would inspect his troops. He didn't look for medals or weapons. He looked for a stray hair on a collar, a smudge of soot on a white glove, or the faint smell of tobacco. To be a part of this army, you had to erase your own personality. You had to become a mirror, reflecting the greatness of the master, while remaining invisible yourself. Imagine the great hall, polished to a mirror finish. Every inch of that floor was scrubbed by someone who had to be finished and gone before the first royal foot touched the wood. This was the genius of the system. The royals lived in a world where things simply happened. Fires were always lit. Food was always hot. Silver was always gleaming. They never saw the sweat, the stained fingers, or the tired eyes that made it possible. It was a theater of perfection, performed by actors who were never allowed to take a bow. The hierarchy within the Silent Army was as rigid as the peerage itself. A lady's maid or a valet was the elite. They breathed the same air as the king and queen. They touched the royal skin, they heard the royal whispers. But further down, in the basements, were the scullery maids and the turnspit boys. These children lived in a world of gray ash and greasy water. They were the foundation upon which the entire palace rested, yet they were the most invisible of all. They were the ghosts of the cellar, forbidden from ever being seen on the upper floors. Think of the girl in the scullery. Her hands are perpetually red, cracked by the lye in the soap and the biting cold of the water. She spends 16 hours a day scouring copper pans until they shine like suns. When those pans reach the royal table, the Duke sees only his own reflection in the metal. He does not see the girl. He does not know her name. He does not know that she hasn't seen the sun in 3 days. To him, the pan is simply a tool. To her, it is her entire world. The silent army was fueled by a currency of secrets. They were the walls of the palace, and walls have ears. Every valet knew which earl was losing his fortune at cards. Every maid knew which duchess was crying behind her embroidery. They carried these secrets like heavy stones in their pockets. But the code of the army was absolute. To speak of what you saw was to invite total destruction. A servant without a recommendation letter was a person without a future. Silence was not just a rule, it was a means of survival. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the palace held its breath, the silent army would find small moments of humanity. In the servants' hall, away from the prying eyes of the masters, they would sit at a long wooden table. There, the silence would break, just for a moment. A joke shared in a whisper. A piece of bread passed to a hungry child. A hand placed on a tired shoulder. These were the small flickers of warmth in a life of cold service. But even in their rest, they were watching the bells. The bell board was the heart of the servants' quarters. A row of metal bells, each attached to a wire that ran through the walls to a different room in the palace. When a bell jangled, the army moved. It didn't matter if it was 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. The bell was the voice of the master, and it was a voice that could not be ignored. As the day progressed, the invisible machinery shifted gears. While the royals dined on multi-course meals, the silent army was orchestrating a ballet of timing. Footmen stood behind chairs, perfectly still, ignoring the delicious smells of roasted meats. They were trained to ignore their own hunger. Their only purpose was to anticipate a need before it was even spoken. A glass of wine refilled, a napkin replaced, a plate whisked away. All done without a single word exchanged between the master and the servant. There is a profound melancholy in the life of the silent army. They spent their lives building a home that was never theirs. They polished furniture they were never allowed to sit on. They prepared banquets they were never allowed to taste. They lived in the heart of luxury, yet they remained in the grip of poverty. It was a life of proximity without participation. They knew the texture of the king's velvet, but they slept on rough burlap. As the decades passed, the members of this army would grow old. Their backs would bow from the weight of the coal. Their eyes would dim from the smoke of the lamps. And when they could no longer serve, they were often replaced by a younger, stronger shadow. The palace remained. The royals remained. Only the shadows changed. History remembers the names of the people who wore the crowns. But the palace, the physical building, it was kept alive by the breath of the people in the shadows. They were the heartbeat of the stone. They were the ones who conquered the night, so the royals could enjoy the day. They were the guardians of the tradition, the keepers of the flame, and the masters of the silence. Tonight, as you listen to these words, think about the silence in your own life. Think about the people in our world today who make our lives easy without us ever noticing. The ones who clean the glass towers while we sleep. The ones who harvest the food we eat. The silent army has not disappeared, it has only moved into the modern world. History is a mirror, and when we look into it, we see the faces of those who were never meant to be seen. The palace is growing dark now. The shadows are stretching across the stone floors, returning to the corners where they belong. The day's work for the silent army is nearing its end, only for the night's work to begin. The cycle never truly stops. But for you, the cycle has reached a place of rest. The bells are silent. The fires have burned down to a soft, orange glow. You have no duties tonight. You have no master to answer to. You are free to simply be. Let your breath slow down. Feel the coolness of the air. Imagine the heavy, velvet silence of the palace as it settles for the night. You are safe. You are at peace. The sun has finally dipped below the horizon, and a different kind of darkness begins to settle over the stone corridors. In an age before electricity, the night was an enemy that had to be fought with fire. And in this palace, that war was fought by a single boy. Tonight, we follow him. We walk behind a child whose only purpose was to hold back the shadows for the powerful. We are entering the world of the boy who lit 300 candles every single night. In the grand scheme of history, his name is lost. He wasn't a knight, he wasn't a prince, but without him, the palace would have been a cold, terrifying tomb. Imagine him standing in the great wax room, surrounded by crates of tallow and expensive beeswax. The air here is thick, heavy with the scent of animal fat and honey. He is small for his age, his hands perpetually stained with the gray residue of wicks and soot. His task begins when the twilight is still purple against the glass. He carries a long wooden pole with a small, flickering flame protected by a glass hood at the end. This is his wand, and the palace is his silent stage. He starts in the great gallery. Rows of silver sconces line the walls, waiting like cold, metallic eyes. One by one, he reaches up. Can you hear the soft hiss as the flame touches the wick? It starts as a tiny, blue point of light, then expands into a warm, dancing orange glow. As he moves down the hallway, the shadows begin to retreat, scurrying into the corners like frightened animals. But for the boy, the light is not for his comfort. He must stay in the dimness, moving quickly, always keeping his eyes on the wicks. The palace had a hierarchy even in its light. In the royal chambers, only the finest white beeswax candles were used. They burned clean, smelling faintly of summer meadows. But in the service corridors, the boy lit candles made of tallow, rendered animal fat. These burned with a thick, greasy smoke that stung his eyes and coated his throat. This was the divide of the palace, written in the very air people breathed. The rich breathed honey, the poor breathed suet. Think about the focus required for such a task. 300 flames. Each one a potential disaster. A single spark on a silk curtain, a fallen candle on a dry rug, and the entire history of the dynasty could go up in smoke. The boy carries the weight of the palace's safety on his narrow shoulders. He checks each glass shade, trims each burnt wick with silver shears, and ensures that not a single drop of wax falls onto the polished floors. As he enters the king's study, the room is silent. The heavy oak furniture seems to absorb the light. He moves around the massive desk, lighting the candelabra that will allow the monarch to sign decrees and read maps. The boy is so quiet that even the dust motes hanging in the air don't seem to stir. He is a ghost in the presence of power. He sees the maps of empires, the letters that start wars, but to him, they are just objects that need light. By the time he reaches the 100th candle, his arms are beginning to ache. The pole grows heavier with every room. The grand ballroom is the most difficult. Massive chandeliers hang from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of crystal. They must be lowered by heavy iron chains. Can you hear the slow, rhythmic clank of the winch? The boy turns the handle, his muscles straining, until the great crystal ring is within reach. He moves around the circle, lighting candle after candle. The reflections begin to bounce off the thousands of glass droplets. Suddenly, the room is transformed. It is no longer a cold, dark hall. It is a shimmering, golden cathedral of light. For a brief second, the boy stands in the center of this radiance. He is the creator of this sun. But he cannot stay. He must raise the chandelier back to the heavens and vanish before the guests arrive. The isolation of his job is a special kind of burden. While the other servants work in teams in the kitchen or the laundry, the candle boy is a solitary traveler. He exists in the transition between day and night. He is awake when others are winding down, and he is working when the music upstairs begins to play. He hears the distant sound of violins, the laughter of women in silk dresses, the clink of crystal glasses. It is a world he can see clearly through the light he provides, but a world he can never touch. As the night wears on, his job changes. Now, he is the guardian of the fading flame. He must walk the halls again, replacing the candles that have burned too low. He carries a basket of fresh tapers, swapping them out with the practiced ease of a magician. He watches the wax drip, forming strange, frozen shapes on the silver holders. To him, the wax is like a clock, telling him exactly how much of the night is left. Imagine the fatigue that sets in at midnight. The palace is vast, and he has walked miles of stone corridors. His feet ache, and the smell of smoke has become a part of his skin. But he cannot sleep yet. He must wait for the final candle to be blown out. He waits in the shadows of the servants' hall, his head nodding, fighting the pull of exhaustion. The candle boy's life was measured in inches of wax and hours of darkness. He knew the palace better than anyone, because he saw it in its most honest state, unlit and cold. He knew which floorboards creaked, which doors had drafts, and which corners felt heavy with the weight of old secrets. He was the silent witness to the night. There is a lesson in his story, a quiet truth about the world we inhabit. We often admire the light, but we forget the hand that struck the match. We celebrate the beauty of the ballroom, but we overlook the boy who strained his back to lower the chandelier. Our history is full of these invisible hands, these silent providers who worked in the dim spaces to make the world bright for others. The boy's work is a reminder that even the smallest task holds the world together. Without the light, the palace is just a pile of cold stone. Without the boy, the king is just a man sitting in the dark. Every flame he lit was a small act of defiance against the void. Every wick he trimmed was a service to the human need for clarity and warmth. Now, the night is finally reaching its deepest point. The music has stopped. The guests have retired to their beds. One by one, the lights are being extinguished. The boy makes his final round. He uses a silver snuffer to pinch out the flames, leaving behind a small, curling ribbon of white smoke. The warmth fades. the golden glow vanishes. The shadows return to claim their territory. He walks back to his small bed in the cellar. His clothes smell of smoke and beeswax, a scent that will never truly leave him. He blows out his own tiny tallow stump, the 301st candle of the night. Finally, he is allowed to belong to the darkness. Finally, he can rest. The palace is still now. The stone is cold. The silence is absolute. And as you listen to the echo of his footsteps, let your own world grow dim. Let the flicker of your thoughts settle into a soft, quiet ember. You have traveled through the night, and now you have reached the shore of sleep. The light is gone, but the warmth remains in your heart. You are safe in the stillness. You are part of the quiet history of the world. While the upper floors of the palace were designed for the eyes of God and kings, there was another world, a world that gravity itself seemed to forget. To understand the life of a servant, we must descend. We must leave behind the silk tapestries and the soaring ceilings. We must go where the light of the sun feels like a distant memory. Tonight, we are exploring the reality of life below the stairs. We are going to the places where the palace workers actually slept. In the architectural mind of the past, a servant was not a person who needed a home. They were a tool that needed to be stored. And so, the sleeping quarters were tucked away in the most inconvenient, the most uncomfortable, and the most invisible parts of the building. For the men, it was often the damp, limestone cellars. For the women, it was the sweltering, cramped attics directly beneath the lead roofs. Imagine the transition as you walk down the service stairs. The air begins to grow heavy. The temperature drops. The walls change from smooth, painted plaster to rough, weeping stone. There is a persistent sound here, a low, rhythmic dripping of water from the pipes above. This is the sound of the palace's plumbing, and for those who lived down here, it was their only lullaby. In these subterranean rooms, the concept of a bedroom did not exist. Instead, there were dormitories. Long, narrow halls filled with rows of iron cots or wooden pallets. The bedding was rarely changed. It was stuffed with straw or horsehair, which grew damp and clumped over time. Can you feel the scratch of the coarse burlap against your skin? It is a far cry from the Egyptian cotton and goose down just 30 feet above your head. The smell is the first thing that hits you. It is a mixture of old sweat, coal dust, and the earthy scent of a cellar that never truly dries. There is no ventilation here. The windows, if there are any at all, are small, barred slits at the very top of the wall, level with the dirt of the courtyard outside. Through these slits, the servants could only see the feet of the people walking above. They lived their lives looking at the world from the ground up. In the winter, these rooms were like iceboxes. Despite being the people who built the fires for the royals, the servants were rarely allowed their own. They slept huddled together for warmth, layers of thin, moth-eaten blankets piled high. They would breathe into their hands to keep their fingers from numbing. The irony was a heavy shadow. They spent their days in rooms kept at a perfect 70 degrees, only to retire to a bed that was barely above freezing. But the physical discomfort was only part of the story. The true weight of life below stairs was the lack of a self. In these rooms, there was no place to put a personal item. No shelf for a book, no frame for a picture of a mother or a sister. A servant's entire life had to fit into a single, small wooden trunk at the foot of their bed. Inside that trunk were their only treasures, perhaps a dried flower, a tattered letter, or a single clean shirt for their one day off a month. Think of the psychological toll of never having a door you could lock. Your sleep was never truly your own. The house steward or the head housekeeper could walk through the dormitory at any moment. Privacy was a luxury reserved for those with titles. To be a servant was to be constantly available, even in your dreams. If a bell rang in the middle of the night, you had to be out of that straw bed and dressed in seconds. You slept with one ear always open, listening for the summons of the wire. In the attics, the experience was different, but no less harsh. In the summer, the heat was unbearable. The sun beat down on the lead roofing, turning the small rooms into ovens. The air became still and suffocating. The servant girls would lie awake, gasping for air, watching the moonlight crawl across the floorboards. They were so high up that the birds on the roof were their only neighbors. Yet, in the darkness of these shared rooms, a strange and beautiful community formed. When the lanterns were finally dimmed, the silence of the day would break into a soft chorus of whispers. This was the only time they were allowed to be human. They would tell stories of the villages they had left behind. They would share their dreams of one day saving enough money to open a small shop, or perhaps getting married and having a cottage of their own. These whispers were the threads that held their spirits together. There is a quiet dignity in these forgotten spaces. We often look at palaces as monuments to greatness, but they are also monuments to endurance. Every stone in the floor of the servants' quarters has been smoothed by the feet of thousands of people whose names we will never know. People who worked until their bones ached, and then crawled into these cold beds to do it all again the next day. As you imagine yourself lying on one of those straw pallets, feel the stillness of the underground. The world above is full of politics, war, and grand balls. But down here, life is reduced to the basics of survival and connection. The dampness of the wall, the warmth of a neighbor, the hope for a few hours of dreamless sleep. We must remember that history is not just made in the throne rooms. It is made in the kitchens, the laundries, and the crowded dormitories. The people who slept below the stairs were the silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires. They saw the dirty laundry of the powerful, both literally and figuratively. They knew the truth of the palace better than the king ever could. The night is deep now. The dripping of the pipes has slowed. The whispers in the dormitory have faded into the rhythmic breathing of the exhausted. Even the mice in the rafters have gone to ground. The palace is a mountain of stone, and you are tucked deep inside its heart. There is a strange comfort in the darkness. It levels the field. In the pitch black of the night, there is no difference between the silk of a duchess and the burlap of a maid. Everyone is just a soul seeking rest. Everyone is just waiting for the sun to return. But for now, the sun is far away. You are safe in the quiet. You are wrapped in the history of those who came before you. Let the weight of your body sink into your bed. Let the coldness of the stone walls in your mind turn into the warmth of your own sanctuary. The bells are silent. The work is finished. The silent army is finally at rest. And you are free to join them in the peace of the night. Let your thoughts drift like smoke from a dying fire. Soft, gray, and weightless. You are descending into the deepest part of the palace, the place of perfect quiet. Sleep now. Let the stone protect you. The palace is never truly silent, even when the voices of the masters have faded. If you listen closely, deep within the hollows of the walls, you can hear a faint, rhythmic metallic vibration. It is the sound of the wires. Long, thin strands of copper and iron snaking through the darkness like the nerves of a giant beast. Tonight, we are going to explore the mechanical heartbeat of the royal household. We are talking about the bell system. The orders that could never, under any circumstance, be ignored. In the mid-18th and 19th centuries, technology began to change the way the powerful spoke to the invisible. Before the bells, a master had to shout, or ring a handbell, or wait for a servant to enter the room. But the bell system changed everything. It allowed the royals to summon a human being without ever having to raise their voice. It was a silent, demanding language of springs and brass. Imagine the servants' hall, a long, low-ceilinged room deep in the basement. Along one wall hangs a wooden board, and upon it, a row of 20, 30, or even 50 bells. Each one is mounted on a coiled spring. Each one is labeled with a name. The blue drawing room. The king's dressing room. The west gallery. The nursery. Most of the time, these bells hang perfectly still. They are cold, silent circles of brass. But then, it happens. A mile away, in a room filled with silk and sunlight, a duke reaches for a small, embroidered handle hanging by the fireplace. He pulls it, just once, a sharp, downward tug. Deep in the walls, the wire begins to move. It travels over pulleys, around corners, through dusty floorboards. And then, in the basement, the silence is shattered. Jangle. 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 One specific bell begins to dance on its spring. It doesn't stop immediately. It continues to vibrate, a frantic, mocking sound that demands an answer. For the servant sitting below, that sound is a command that bypasses the mind and goes straight to the muscles. You don't ask why. You don't wonder what is needed. You simply move. You smooth your apron, you check your reflection in a polished tray, and you begin the long climb up the stairs. The bell is the voice of a master who doesn't even have to look at you to make you run. The bell system created a psychological tether. It meant that even in your moments of rest, you were never truly free. Imagine sitting down to your only meal of the day, a bowl of hot stew finally in front of you. Your spoon is halfway to your mouth, and then the wire twitches. Your bell rings. The rules of the palace are absolute. You must stand. You must leave your food to grow cold. The bell is a master that never sleeps, and it has no mercy for your hunger. There was a specific art to listening to the bells. An experienced footman could tell the mood of the person pulling the wire just by the sound of the ring. A gentle, rhythmic sway meant a request for tea or a letter to be moved. But a sharp, violent, continuous jangle meant anger. It meant someone was impatient. It meant trouble was waiting at the top of the stairs. The servants would watch the board, their hearts beating in time with the swinging brass, trying to prepare their faces before they reached the door. Think about the complexity of this hidden network. Hundreds of feet of wire, all tensioned perfectly. If a wire snapped, it was a disaster. The bell hanger was a specialized craftsman who would spend days crawling through the crawlspaces of the palace, threading the needles of the walls. He saw parts of the palace that neither the king nor the housekeeper ever saw. He knew the dusty, dark gaps where the spiders lived, the places where the secret messages of the wires were whispered. To the royals, the system was magic. They pulled a cord, and a human being appeared as if out of thin air. They never saw the frantic running in the corridors. They never saw the sweat on the brow of the maid who had to sprint from the laundry to the third floor. To them, the bell was a remote control for the world. It reinforced the idea that servants were not people, but extensions of the palace itself. Parts of the furniture that could be summoned with a flick of the wrist. But the bells also had a darker side. They were a constant reminder of the surveillance of the highborn. In many palaces, there was a night bell. A single bell that rang in the valet's room, used for emergencies in the middle of the night. The sound of that bell in the pitch black was terrifying. It usually meant illness, or a fire, or a sudden, late-night whim that required someone to dress and descend into the cold. It meant the night was not yours. It belonged to the wire. In the quiet of the basement, the bell board was a map of the royal life. When the bells were silent for a long time, it meant the family was out for a drive, or perhaps at a ball. Those were the moments when the silent army could breathe. They would look at the still bells with a mixture of respect and resentment. The brass circles were like sleeping eyes, always ready to wake up and watch them again. There is a rhythm to the memory of the bells. Tug, slide, jangle. It is the sound of a century of service. It is the sound of a world where communication was physical, where every word of command had to travel through metal and stone before it reached a human ear. As you listen to the silence of your own room tonight, think of the thousands of wires that once pulsed through the great houses of the world. They are still there, in many old buildings, hidden behind the modern wallpaper, rusted and broken. They are the fossilized remains of a time when the world was divided by the pull of a cord. But tonight, there are no wires for you. There are no bells waiting to pull you from your rest. The board is empty. The springs are still. You are in a place where no one can summon you, where no one can demand your time. The sound of the brass has turned into the sound of the wind. The tension in the copper wires has dissolved into the softness of your pillow. You are at the end of the line, where the signals stop. Let the vibration of the day fade away. Feel the stillness in your hands and feet. The palace is dark, the basement is quiet, and the bells have finally stopped swinging. You are free to drift. You are free to sleep. The wires are at rest. The brass is cold. Everything is still. Sleep now. Long before the sun has even considered touching the horizon, the heart of the palace begins to beat. It starts with a flicker of orange in the darkness. A single match struck in a cavern of stone. We are entering the great kitchens, a place of fire and steam that exists entirely out of sight. Tonight, we witness the monumental task of feeding a castle before the world wakes up. This is the kitchen before dawn, where life is sustained by those who must never be seen. The kitchen of a royal palace is not a room, it is a factory. It is a world built of heavy copper, blackened iron, and scrubbed oak. As you step into the space, the air is different than anywhere else in the palace. It is thick with the smell of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the faint, sharp scent of vinegar. The walls are made of thick stone, designed to contain the immense heat that will soon radiate from the massive ranges. Imagine the fire starter. Usually a young boy, he is the first to arrive. He kneels before the great charcoal stoves, his face inches from the ash. He clears away the remains of yesterday's heat and builds a new pyramid of kindling. Can you hear the soft, dry crackle as the wood catches? That small flame is the starting gun for a race that will last 18 hours. By the time the king asks for his breakfast, these stoves must be glowing like the gates of a furnace. The silence of the early morning is soon replaced by a rhythmic symphony of labor. Thump, thump, thump. That is the sound of the baker kneading heavy dough on a flour-dusted table. He works in the shadows, his arms white with dust, his movements as steady as a heartbeat. He is making the rolls, the brioche, and the thick, crusty loaves that will be torn apart at the royal table. To him, the bread is a task, but to the royals, it is a miracle that simply appears every morning, warm and smelling of yeast. There is a strange law in the palace kitchen, the law of invisibility. The food must travel from these hot, frantic basements to the elegant dining rooms without a single trace of the struggle. No smell of burnt grease must reach the nostrils of a princess. No sound of a dropped spoon must echo in the hallways. The kitchen is a world of chaos, but the result must be a world of perfect, silent grace. Think of the vegetable maids. They sit on low stools in the corner, surrounded by mountains of carrots, leeks, and potatoes. Their hands are perpetually cold, numbed by the ice water used to wash the earth from the roots. They peel and chop with a mechanical precision. Every slice must be identical. Every garnish must be a work of art. They are the unsung sculptors of the palace, creating beauty that will be consumed and forgotten in a matter of minutes. As the clock ticks towards 6, the pressure begins to rise. The chef de cuisine arrives. He is the conductor of this orchestra. He doesn't move with the frantic energy of the underservants. He moves with a terrifying, quiet authority. He tastes everything. A pinch of salt here, a splash of wine there. He knows that a single mistake, a sauce that is too thin, a roast that is too dry, is not just a failure of cooking. It is a failure of the crown. Can you hear the heavy, metallic clatter of the copper pans? They are massive, some so large it takes 2 men to lift them. They hang from the ceiling like burnished shields. As they are moved onto the heat, the kitchen begins to fill with steam. The windows fog over, blurring the outside world, until the kitchen feels like a ship lost in a white mist. In this mist, the roast cooks manage the spits. Huge joints of beef and venison are turned slowly over open flames. The fat drips onto the coals with a loud, aggressive hiss. The heat is intense, scorching the skin and making the eyes water. Yet, the cooks cannot leave their posts. They must watch the color of the meat as if it were a precious gem. This is the brutal, physical reality of royal luxury. The meat is tender because someone else endured the heat. Behind the scenes, there is a secret language of the kitchen. A series of hand signals and low whistles used to communicate over the roar of the fires. They don't shout. Shouting is for the common streets. In the palace kitchen, even the stress is muffled. They work in a state of high-tension silence, anticipating each other's needs without a word. A knife passed, a plate warmed, a fire stoked. As the breakfast trays are prepared, the transformation is complete. The rough, soot-stained world of the kitchen is hidden beneath silver covers and fine-bone china. The footmen arrive to carry the food upstairs. They act as the bridge between the two worlds. They take the heat of the kitchen and carry it into the cool, lavender-scented air of the palace. By the time the silver cover is lifted in the royal bedroom, the steam that rises is the only evidence of the hours of labor that occurred in the dark. What did these cooks think about as they watched the sun finally rise through the steam? Did they feel the hunger of the people they served? Often, the servants were the last to eat. They lived in a palace of plenty, surrounded by the finest ingredients in the world, yet they survived on tea, hard bread, and the trimmings that were too unsightly for the royal plate. They were the keepers of the feast, but they were rarely the guests. There is a quiet, haunting beauty in the kitchen after the first rush is over. The fires are banked, the tables are wiped down, and for a few minutes, there is peace. The scullery maid begins the monumental task of cleaning the copper. She uses sand and lemon, scrubbing until her fingers ache, restoring the shine to the pans so the cycle can begin again for lunch. As you listen to the sounds of this invisible world, think about the labor that goes into every comfort we enjoy. We are all served by kitchens we never see. We all live on the efforts of people who work in the shadows. The palace kitchen is a reminder that greatness is built on a foundation of hidden, tireless, and silent work. The steam is clearing now. The fires are glowing softly, like the embers of a dying star. The morning rush has passed, and the palace is fed. The silent army has once again performed its miracle. The air in your room is cool. The sounds of the world are distant. You are far away from the heat of the stoves and the clatter of the copper. You are in a place of rest. A place where no one is waiting for a meal, and no one is tending a fire. Let the warmth of the story settle over you like a heavy wool blanket. Feel the stillness of the stone floors in your mind. The kitchen is quiet. The baker has finished his task. The fire starter is finally asleep. You are safe. You are at peace. The work of the day is done, and the night is yours to keep. The heart of the palace is still. The fires are low. Sleep now. Deep in the furthest wing of the palace, away from the scent of perfume and the sound of music, lies a world of white mist and rhythmic splashing. This is the laundry. A place where the elegance of the royal family is stripped away, and the raw reality of human life is washed clean. Tonight, we enter the laundry rooms of steam and secrets. We follow the women whose hands were never dry, and whose ears heard more than any priest ever could. If the kitchen was the heart of the palace, the laundry was its lungs. It was a place of constant, heavy respiration. As you open the heavy oak door, the air doesn't just hit you, it embraces you. It is a thick, humid heat, smelling of lavender, and the sharp, metallic scent of hot iron. The walls are slick with condensation, the stone floors perpetually wet, reflecting the flickering light of the tallow candles like a dark, subterranean lake. Imagine the laundry maids. Their world began while the rest of the palace was still dreaming. They stood before massive, waist-high wooden tubs, their sleeves rolled tight above their elbows. Can you hear the sound of the water? Slosh. Rhythmic slosh. It is the heartbeat of this room. They worked in teams, their movements synchronized by years of shared exhaustion. To wash the linens of a palace was not a simple task. It was a war against the elements. Every sheet, every chemise, every silk handkerchief had to be scrubbed by hand against corrugated boards. Think of the friction. The constant, abrasive rubbing of cloth against wood. The skin on the maid's knuckles was often worn thin, stained red by the heat and the harshness of the soap. Yet, they could not stop. The palace produced a mountain of fabric every day, and the mountain never stopped growing. The laundry was the great leveler of the palace. In the ballroom, the queen was a figure of divine grace. But in the laundry, she was human. The maids saw the sweat stains on the king's shirts. They saw the tears in the lace of a duchess's hem. They saw the hidden bloodstains, the spilled wine, the evidence of late-night secrets that the royals thought they had tucked away. The laundry maids knew who was ill, who was heartbroken, and who was hiding a secret. They washed away the sins of the palace, one basin at a time. There is a specific sound to this work. The heavy, wet thud of a soaked sheet being thrown onto a draining table. The high-pitched hiss of a red-hot iron meeting a damp collar. And beneath it all, the low, constant murmur of voices. Because in the laundry, silence was impossible. The steam created a veil of privacy. Amidst the clouds of vapor, the maids could whisper. They traded the gossip of the upper floors like a secret currency. They knew which footman was in love with which maid, and which lord was losing his mind. As the morning progresses, the room becomes a forest of drying linen. Huge wooden racks are lowered from the ceiling, draped in white fabric that hangs like the sails of a ghost ship. The air grows even thicker. To walk through the laundry is to lose yourself in a maze of damp, fragrant walls. Every piece of fabric has a history. Every stitch tells a story of the person who wore it. The ironing room was the final stage of the ritual. It was a place of intense, dry heat. Large stoves were kept glowing red-hot, filled with heavy, flat-faced irons. A maid would use a thick cloth to grab the handle, testing the heat near her cheek. Hiss. The iron glides over the linen, smoothing away the wrinkles of the night. This was an act of meditation. Back and forth. Back and forth. The steam rises, and for a moment, the world is perfectly flat, perfectly white, and perfectly still. What did these women think about as they stared into the mist? They lived in a world where their own clothes were coarse and patched, yet they spent their lives caring for the finest silks in the world. They touched the luxury, but they could never wear it. Their hands were scarred by the very things that made the royals look beautiful. There is a quiet tragedy in that contrast. a story written in the steam that never reached the history books. But there was also a fierce pride in the laundry. A perfectly starched collar, a sheet that smelled of nothing but sun and wind, these were the trophies of their labor. They were the guardians of the palace's image. If the laundry failed, the illusion of royalty died. Without the white linen, the crowns would look tarnished. They were the ones who ensured that the Sun King or the Virgin Queen always appeared as if they were made of light, rather than flesh and bone. As the day begins to fade, the mountain of laundry is finally conquered. The baskets are piled high with folded, fragrant clouds of fabric. The fires in the ironing stoves are allowed to die down. The steam begins to dissipate, revealing the damp, tired faces of the women. Their work is invisible, but it is essential. They leave the room as shadows, returning to their own cold beds, their hands still smelling of lavender and lye. History focuses on the battles won on the field. But there were battles won every day in the laundry. Battles against filth, against time, and against the wear and tear of life. The laundry maids were the cleaners of the soul of the palace. They were the ones who ensured that every day started with a clean slate. As you listen to the fading echoes of the water, think about the softness of your own sheets. Think about the quiet labor that makes your world comfortable. We are all surrounded by the work of hands we will never hold. We all rest on the efforts of the silent army of the past. The room is growing cold now. The water in the tubs is still. The heavy racks have been raised, and the linen hangs in the darkness like sleeping birds. The steam has vanished into the rafters. The palace is settling into the night. The laundry is a place of shadows and damp stone once more. The secret whispers have been tucked away into the folds of the fabric. You are far from the heat of the iron. You are far from the weight of the wet cloth. You are in a place of lightness. A place where the air is clear and the night is soft. Let the rhythm of the washing, the slow, steady slosh of the water, pull you down into the depths of sleep. Feel the coolness of the sheets against your skin. Imagine they were prepared just for you, by hands that cared for every thread. You are clean. You are at rest. The secrets of the day are washed away. The fire is out. The water is calm. Sleep now. As the evening air turns to a deep, velvet blue, the most private corners of the palace begin to transform. We are moving away from the steam of the laundry and the clatter of the kitchen. We are ascending the grand staircase, walking past the silent guards, and entering the inner sanctum. This is the royal bedroom. A place where sleep is not just a biological necessity, but a sacred ritual. Tonight, we witness the meticulous preparation of a space meant for the dreams of the powerful. In the world of the palace, a bedroom was never just a room. It was a theater. It was a temple. And the priests of this temple were the valets and the ladies' maids. As you step across the threshold, the first thing you notice is the silence. It is a heavy, thick silence, muffled by layers of Persian rugs and silk-covered walls. The air here doesn't move. It is scented with the expensive, floral notes of rosewater and the earthy, sweet smoke of sandalwood. Imagine the bed maker. To them, the royal bed was not furniture, it was a monument. It stood in the center of the room, a massive structure of carved mahogany or gilded oak, draped in heavy, embroidered velvet. The preparation begins hours before the monarch arrives. First, the airing of the linen. The sheets are not merely laid down. They are smoothed with a precision that borders on the obsessive. Every wrinkle is a failure. Every fold must be perfectly parallel to the edge of the mattress. Can you hear the soft, rhythmic snap of the fabric as it is shaken out? The sound is like the wing of a bird in a quiet forest. The servants move in a synchronized dance, one on each side of the bed. They tuck the corners with a sharpness that suggests military discipline. They use heavy, silver-handled brushes to smooth the velvet pile of the canopy, ensuring that the light reflects off the fabric in a single, unbroken sheen. This is the architecture of comfort, built by hands that will never know the luxury they create. The ritual extends to the dressing table. This was the altar of the royal image. A maid spends an hour arranging the silver brushes, the crystal perfume bottles, and the ivory combs. Each object has a specific, ancestral place. If a bottle is moved an inch to the left, the harmony of the room is broken. She polishes the silver until it glows with a soft, moonlight radiance. She prepares the night clothes, laying them out across a silk-covered chair with the sleeves open, as if waiting for a ghost to inhabit them. There is a profound sense of theater in the turn down. As the sun disappears, the servant enters to prepare the room for the actual act of sleep. The heavy, floor-to-ceiling curtains are drawn shut, sealing out the world and the night. The firelighter returns, kneeling on the hearth to build a fire that is meant to glow, not roar. It must provide a steady, amber warmth that will last until the morning light. The flickering shadows of the flames begin to dance across the ceiling, bringing the carved angels and gold leaf to life. Think of the water carrier. They bring the final basin of the night. The water must be the exact temperature of a summer afternoon. It is poured into a porcelain bowl painted with delicate flowers. Beside it, a single, fresh towel is draped, smelling of sun-dried linen. Every detail is designed to remove the friction of existence. The royal must feel that the world has been polished just for them, that the night has been tamed and curated for their pleasure. But there is a hidden tension in this beauty. To prepare a sacred ritual, the servant must be a master of observation. They must know the quirks of the master. Does the queen prefer 3 pillows or 4? Does the king need a glass of watered wine on his nightstand? They memorize the map of royal desire. They are the keepers of the most intimate habits. They see the monarch when the crown is off, when the public mask has slipped, and the vulnerability of the night begins to show. The lady's maid stands in the corner, a silent sentinel. She is the one who will unlace the corset, who will brush the hair for 100 strokes until it shines like silk. In these moments, the bedroom is a confessional. In the rhythmic stroke of the brush, secrets are often whispered. The maid hears of heartaches, of political fears, of the exhaustion of being a symbol. She absorbs these secrets into her own silence, weaving them into the fabric of the room. What did it feel like to spend your life preparing a paradise you could never inhabit? To touch the finest lace, to scent the air with the world's rarest oils, only to return to a room with a single candle and a straw mattress? There is a quiet, haunting grace in the service. It is an act of pure devotion to an ideal. The servants were the artists of the night, creating a masterpiece of peace that would be destroyed the moment the royal woke up, and recreated again the next evening. As the final candle is placed in the silver holder by the bed, the ritual reaches its conclusion. The room is ready. It is a warm, golden cocoon, protected from the cold stone of the palace and the darkness of the world outside. The servants bow to the empty bed, a final gesture of respect to the office they serve, and then they slip out of the door, closing it with a click that is so soft, it is almost a sigh. The palace is a world of noise and power during the day. But here, in the prepared bedroom, it is a world of dreams. The labor of the silent army has culminated in this single, perfect space. They have conquered the shadows. They have tamed the cold. They have prepared the way for sleep. As you listen to the description of this golden room, let your own space become a sanctuary. You don't need a valet or a maid to prepare your rest. The history of the world is a long line of people seeking the same peace you find tonight. Let the warmth of the imagined fire reach your own heart. Let the scent of the rosewater calm your mind. The silk curtains of your thoughts are closing. The silver brushes of the day's worries have been laid aside. The hearth of your spirit is glowing with a steady, gentle light. You are the monarch of your own quiet kingdom now. The stone walls of the palace are far away. The heavy wires of the bells are still. The ritual is complete. The space is sacred. Feel the weight of your blankets as if they were the finest velvet. Feel the stillness of the air as if it were scented with the gardens of the past. You are entering the sanctum of sleep. The flames are dying down to embers. The shadows are soft and kind. The night is waiting for you to claim it. Sleep now. The room is ready. In the long, echoing galleries of the palace, there stood a particular kind of shadow. It was a shadow in a red coat or a shadow in a black waistcoat. These were the sentinels of the threshold. The footmen and the guards whose only duty was to stand, perfectly still, beside a closed door. Tonight, we enter the world of those who were paid to be statues. We explore the lives of the servants who guarded the doors, but heard absolutely everything. To the casual observer, these men were merely part of the architecture. They were as immobile as the marble columns they leaned near. But beneath the powdered wigs and the stiff, gold-braided collars, there was an intense, razor-sharp focus. When you are forbidden from moving, your senses begin to sharpen in ways that others cannot understand. Their eyes became cameras, recording every face that passed. Their ears became microphones, catching the slightest vibration of a voice through thick, oak panels. Imagine the hall porter or the door guard. He stands in a drafty corridor for 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours at a time. His back is a straight line of iron. His eyes are fixed on a point on the opposite wall. He does not scratch an itch. He does not shift his weight. To the royal family, he is not a man, he is a piece of security furniture. But in that forced stillness, he becomes a master of the unspoken. Can you hear the heavy, muffled murmur of voices coming from behind the heavy, velvet-draped doors? To the average person, it is just noise. But to the guard, it is a map of the kingdom's future. He hears the sharp, frantic tone of a minister losing an argument. He hears the soft, tearful pleading of a princess being told she must marry a stranger. He hears the cold, calculating whispers of a coup being planned in the dead of night. He is the most dangerous man in the palace, because he possesses the truth without ever having to ask a question. There is a specific smell to these corridors. It is the scent of old floor wax, cold stone, and the faint, metallic tang of the swords and medals worn by the men who pass by. The guard inhales it all. He watches the body language of the powerful. He sees the way a general's hand trembles as he leaves the king's study. He sees the way a mistress wipes a stray tear before entering the ballroom. He knows the secrets that are never written in the official ledgers. Think of the footman standing behind a chair during a private dinner. He is so close he can smell the wine on the king's breath. He is so close he could reach out and touch the royal shoulder. But he must remain a ghost. The royals talk as if he is not there. They discuss taxes, they discuss scandals, they discuss the very servants who are standing right behind them. It is a bizarre, psychological vacuum. To be present but absent. To be the witness but never the participant. This silence was a heavy burden. A guard who whispered a secret could find himself in a dungeon or on the streets in an instant. And so, the secret stayed locked within them. They became walking vaults of history. Imagine the weight of knowing that a war is coming, or that a queen is unfaithful, while you are expected to do nothing but open a door with a bow. Their loyalty was not always born of love, but of the shared silence that the palace demanded. There was a code among the door guards, a secret language of the eyes. When two guards passed each other in the hall, a single, brief glance could communicate a world of information. The king is angry today. The duchess is leaving. Something is wrong in the north wing. They were an intelligence network that functioned without a single word being spoken. They were the invisible web that held the palace's secrets together. As the night grows deeper, the corridors become even more haunting. The torches flicker in the drafts, casting long, distorted shadows of the guards against the tapestries. In the stillness of the small hours, the palace itself seems to talk. The wood groans. The stones settle. And the guard remains. He is the bridge between the noise of the day and the secrets of the night. What did they do with all that knowledge? Some used it to protect their masters, becoming the most trusted advisors in secret. Others carried it to their graves, their lips sealed by a lifetime of discipline. But they all shared one thing. They knew that power is a fragile thing, often held together by the very people it refuses to acknowledge. There is a quiet irony in their position. The royals spent their lives building walls to keep the world out, but they forgot that the walls themselves have ears. The servants were the walls. They were the boundary between the public mask and the private reality. They saw the king without his crown, and the queen without her jewels, and they knew that underneath the silk, everyone is just a human being, afraid of the dark. As you listen to the echo of these silent sentinels, think about the barriers in your own life. Think about the doors you guard, and the things you hear when the world thinks you are not listening. History is not just made by those who speak, but by those who listen in the shadows. The palace is finally falling into a deeper sleep. The guards at the doors are being relieved of their posts. They walk back to their cold quarters, their boots clicking softly on the stone. The secrets they heard today are now tucked away, stored in the dark corners of their minds. The corridors are empty now. The doors are locked. The candles have burned down to nothing. You are far from the prying ears of the palace. You are in a place of total, beautiful privacy. Let the stillness of the guard become your own stillness. Feel the steadiness of your breath, as slow and rhythmic as a sentinel on duty. But you have no door to guard. You have no secrets to keep. You are free to let go of the day. The weight of the world is lifting. The heavy oak panels of your thoughts are closing for the night. You are safe in the silence. You are protected by the history of the night. The shadows are soft. The air is cool. The palace is at rest. Sleep now. Let the silence be your shield. There is a moment, just as the final candle in the great hall flickers and dies, when the palace undergoes a profound change. To the royal family, the day is over. The world has gone to sleep. But for a specific group of people, the day is only just beginning. These are the creatures of the moonlight. The servants who were invisible during the daylight hours, but became absolutely essential as soon as the sun vanished. Tonight, we walk through the halls of the night shift. The workers who lived their lives in the blue shadows of the palace. In the philosophy of the royal household, the daytime was for show. It was for grand gestures, for politics, and for the public gaze. But the night was for maintenance. It was the time when the wounds of the day were healed. As you move through the corridors at 2 in the morning, the palace feels like a different entity. The air is thinner, cooler, and smells of cold stone and extinguishing wax. The only light comes from the high windows, where the moon casts silver rectangles onto the floorboards. Imagine the night watchman. He is a man who has not seen a noonday sun in 20 years. His skin is the color of parchment, his eyes wide and adjusted to the gloom. He carries a heavy iron lantern, the flame inside casting a rhythmic, swaying shadow against the tapestries. He does not walk with the hurried pace of a daytime footman. He moves slowly, deliberately. He is the pulse of the palace in its sleep. He listens for the things that no one else hears. The rattle of a loose shutter. The scurrying of a mouse behind the wainscoting. The heavy, slow breathing of a sleeping building. For these workers, invisibility was a professional requirement. If they were seen by a royal during the day, it was often a mistake that could lead to a reprimand. They were the unpeople. The ones who cleaned the chimneys while the rooms were empty. The ones who scrubbed the soot from the chandeliers in the dead of night. They existed in the gaps of time. To them, the palace was not a home of luxury. It was a landscape of tasks that had to be completed before the first bird sang. Think of the night scourer. Her job was to clean the heavy, grease-laden grates of the kitchen fires. She could only do this when the fires were cold. She worked in the pitch black, her hands covered in a mixture of oil and ash. She was essential because without her, the kitchen would burn down. Yet, the chef who used those stoves at dawn would never know her name. He would simply find the iron clean and ready. She was a ghost who left behind a legacy of cleanliness, only to vanish into her cellar bed as the sky turned gray. There is a strange, lonely beauty in this nocturnal labor. There is no one to watch you, no one to bow to. In the middle of the night, the hierarchy of the palace softens. A night watchman might share a quiet, whispered word with a stable hand who is tending a sick horse. In the darkness, they are not just servants, they are fellow travelers in the night. They share a unique bond, a secret understanding that the palace belongs to them more than it belongs to the king. Because they are the ones who see it in its nakedness. Can you hear the soft, metallic clink of the watchman's keys? It is a comforting sound, a reminder that the palace is being guarded. He checks every door, every bolt, every window. He is the shield between the sleeping royals and the unknown world outside. He knows every creak of the floorboards. He knows which doors groan in the wind. He is the keeper of the silence. He protects the dreams of people who do not even know he exists. The night nurses in the nursery were perhaps the most essential of all. While the queen slept in her velvet chamber, the nurse sat by a small cradle in a room lit only by a single, dim lamp. She listened to the heartbeat of the future. She rocked the cradle with a tired, steady hand. She was the first face the heir to the throne would see in the middle of a nightmare. She gave the comfort that a crown could not provide. And when the sun rose, she would slip away, replaced by the day nurses in their crisp, white uniforms. Her love was a secret of the night. What did it feel like to live a life in reverse? To sleep when the world was loud, and to work when the world was quiet? There is a psychological weight to being invisible. You begin to feel like a spirit. You begin to feel that you are the only real thing in a world of sleeping shadows. The night workers were the philosophers of the basement. They had hours to think, hours to observe the passage of time without the distraction of human voices. As the clock in the courtyard strikes 4, the night shift begins its final, frantic push. The night bakers are pulling the first loaves from the oven. The boiler men are stoking the coal to ensure the morning water is hot. The invisibility is starting to wear off. The world of the day is pushing its way back in. The night workers move faster now, finishing their tasks, erasing their footprints. They are like the stars. They are always there, but you only see them when the sun goes down. They are the essential foundation of the royal day. Without the invisible work of the night, the visible glory of the day would crumble into chaos. Every clean hearth, every secure door, every quiet nursery was a gift from the people of the shadows. As you listen to the steady, rhythmic pulse of this story, think about the night workers in your own life. The people who drive the trucks while you sleep. The ones who stock the shelves. The ones who keep the lights burning in the distant power stations. We are all supported by an invisible army of the night. The moon is setting now. The silver rectangles on the palace floor are fading into a soft, misty gray. The night watchman is hanging up his keys. The night scourer is washing the ash from her hands. Their day is ending. The palace is about to wake up. The first bell of the morning is about to ring. But for you, the night is still perfect. You are not an unperson. You are a soul at rest. Feel the coolness of the air in your room. Let the silence of the night watchman become your own peace. The palace is safe. The doors are bolted. The fires are ready. You have no more tasks to complete. You have no more shadows to watch. You can let the night take you into its deepest, kindest embrace. The shadows are folding into themselves. The world is still. Sleep now. The night is yours. In the golden age of the great palaces, there was a law more powerful than any decree signed by a king. It was a law that lived in the throat, a law that governed every breath and every footstep. It was the rule of silence. To be a servant was to master the art of the unsaid. In this world, a single word, a misplaced whisper, or even a heavy sigh, could mean the end of a career. Tonight, we explore the heavy weight of that quiet. We look at the lives of those for whom speaking could cost them everything. Imagine walking through the grand corridors of the palace at noon. The air is filled with the scent of beeswax and the sight of priceless art. You see a footman standing by a window or a maid dusting a marble bust. But you hear nothing. They do not hum. They do not whistle. They do not greet one another as they pass. They move like ghosts in a cathedral, bound by a protocol that demanded they be seen, but never heard. The rule of silence was not just about being quiet, it was about total auditory invisibility. If a servant was in a room when a royal entered, they were expected to vanish into the architecture. This often meant turning one's face to the wall, or stepping behind a heavy velvet curtain. You had to hold your breath, making your heart beat as softly as possible, so as not to disturb the royal atmosphere. To speak without being spoken to was considered an act of supreme arrogance. It was a bridge of sound that a servant was never allowed to cross. Think of the housekeeper. She was the enforcer of this silence. She moved through the service wings with a heavy set of keys that never jangled. She watched the young maids, the ones who had just arrived from the country. Those girls were used to laughter, to singing in the fields, to the loud, chaotic joy of a large family. The housekeeper had to break that habit. She taught them that their voices were no longer their own. They belonged to the palace. And the palace demanded a vacuum. There is a psychological toll to this forced muteness. When you cannot speak, your other senses expand to fill the void. You become an expert in the language of the body. You learn to read the meaning in the slam of a door, the rustle of a silk skirt, or the sharp, rhythmic tapping of a cane. The palace became a world of vibrations rather than sentences. Every servant was a master of subtext, knowing exactly what was happening in the royal chambers without ever hearing a single clear word. Can you hear the sound of the silent meal? In the servants' hall, during their brief moments of rest, the rule often followed them. They sat at long, wooden tables, eating their simple bread and broth. In many houses, even here, conversation was discouraged. They ate in a heavy, communal silence, the only sound being the clink of a spoon against a bowl. It was a silence born of exhaustion, but also of habit. When you are told all day that your voice has no value, you eventually begin to believe it. But silence was also a shield. The royals talked in front of their servants as if they were stone statues. They discussed scandals, they plotted political moves, they argued with their spouses. Because the servant was silent, the royal assumed the servant was not listening. This was a grand mistake. Behind the mask of the silent footman, there was a mind recording every detail. The silence made the servants the most informed people in the kingdom. They were the keepers of the truth, hidden behind a wall of enforced quiet. Imagine the lady's maid. She is the only one allowed to break the silence, but only when invited. She speaks in a low, musical murmur, a voice designed to soothe and fade into the background. Her words are like silk, soft and unobtrusive. She knows that her job depends on her ability to be a confidant who never repeats a word. Her silence is her most valuable commodity. It is the foundation of the trust the queen places in her. If that silence is broken, the trust shatters, and the maid vanishes. What happened when the pressure became too much? Sometimes, in the dead of night, in the safety of the damp cellars, the silence would finally break. There are stories of servants who would go into the gardens or the deep woods just to scream, just to hear the sound of their own lungs working. They needed to remind themselves that they were still human, that they still possessed the power of speech. They were like vessels filled to the brink with the secrets and the quiet of the palace, desperate for a release. The rule of silence eventually became a part of their identity. Even on their rare days off, when they visited their families in small, loud cottages, they found it hard to speak. They had become people of the shadows. They walked softly. They spoke in whispers. The palace had rewritten their very nature. They had become the living embodiment of the silent army, carrying the peace of the stone walls wherever they went. As you listen to the steady, quiet rhythm of this story, think about the noise of your own world. We live in a time where everyone is shouting, where every thought is broadcast. To us, the silence of the palace feels like a prison. But to some of those servants, it was a form of dignity. A way to keep a part of themselves private, a part that the masters could never touch. Their silence was their only true possession. The night in the palace is now absolute. The final orders of the day have been given in low, hushed tones. The servants have retreated to their quarters, moving like phantoms through the lightless halls. Not a single board creaks. Not a single door slams. The rule of silence is at its strongest in the dark. The palace is a monument to the unsaid. It is a mountain of stone held together by the quiet of 1,000 souls. As you drift closer to your own sleep, let the rule of silence become a comfort to you. You don't need to speak. You don't need to explain yourself to the world. You can let go of the need to be heard. You can simply exist in the quiet, like a shadow in the gallery. The noise of the day is fading. The voices of the world are growing distant. Your room is a sanctuary of silence. No one is watching. No one is listening for a mistake. Feel the stillness in your hands. Feel the quiet in your mind. The heavy velvet curtains of the night have been drawn shut. You are safe in the vacuum of the dark. The rule is now a blessing. It is the permission to be still. It is the invitation to dream. Sleep now. Let the silence take you. The air in the palace is a map of class and survival. Upstairs, in the dining halls lit by 1,000 beeswax candles, the air is heavy with the scent of roasted venison, truffles, and expensive French wines. But as you travel down the back stairs, the scent begins to thin, becoming sharper, colder, and more desperate. Tonight, we explore the paradox of the palace kitchen. We look at the food, the leftovers, and the quiet hunger that existed right behind the shield of royal luxury. In the eyes of history, the royal table was a mountain of plenty. We see paintings of banquets that seem to never end. But a palace is a great predator. It consumes vast amounts of energy and life, and very little of that bounty ever reached the people who prepared it. For the silent army, food was not a ritual of pleasure. It was a brief, mechanical necessity, often eaten in the shadows of the very stove that cooked the king's feast. Imagine the scullery maid at midday. Above her head, she hears the rhythmic muffled footsteps of the footmen serving a 5-course luncheon. She can smell the butter, the garlic, the sweet, caramelizing sugar of the desserts. But on her own small, wooden stool, she has a bowl of pottage. A gray, thick stew made of oats, cheap vegetables, and perhaps a scrap of gristle left over from the day before. The contrast is a physical ache. She is surrounded by the finest ingredients in the world, yet her own stomach is a hollow chamber of almost. The management of food in a palace was a complex, almost military operation. Nothing was wasted, but not for the sake of the servants. It was for the sake of the budget. The clerk of the kitchen kept a ledger that recorded every ounce of meat and every bottle of wine. The leftovers had their own hierarchy. When a tray returned from the royal table, it was like a battlefield being searched for spoils. Can you hear the sound of the silver platters being set down on the heavy kitchen tables? Clatter. The footmen and the higher-level servants get the first choice of the remains. A half-eaten pheasant. A slice of beef that was slightly too rare for the queen. A piece of cake that lost its shape. These fragments were the perquisites of service. For a valet or a lady's maid, eating a cold, half-gnawed piece of royal luxury was a way to feel, for a fleeting second, like they belonged to the world above. But for the lower servants, the ones who did the heavy lifting, the leftovers were different. They received the broken meat. This was a mixture of scraps, bread crusts, and the ends of vegetables, often thrown together into a large pot to be boiled again into a nameless porridge. There is a quiet tragedy in eating the echoes of someone else's meal. To know that your sustenance depends entirely on what another person chose not to eat. Think of the bread room. In a palace, bread was baked every single dawn. The fresh, warm loaves went upstairs, wrapped in white linen. The stale bread, the loaves from 2 or 3 days ago, stayed downstairs. The servant's bread was often made of coarser flour, mixed with bran to make it last longer. It was hard, dry, and required a great deal of chewing. It was the bread of the shadow world, designed to fill the belly, not to delight the tongue. There was a secret economy of hunger within the walls. Sometimes, a cook would take pity on a young boy, hiding a fresh meat pie under a cloth, or accidentally dropping a sugar plum into a maid's apron. These small acts of rebellion were the only way the servants could reclaim their humanity. Eating a piece of forbidden food was a way of saying, "I am here. I am hungry. I am more than a tool." But hunger was not always about a lack of calories. It was a sensory hunger. Imagine living in a building that smells like a bakery and a butcher shop, but never being allowed to taste the finished masterpiece. The servants lived in a state of perpetual temptation. They saw the lobsters, the pineapples brought from the tropics, the mountains of chocolate. To them, these were not food. They were alien objects, as unreachable as the stars in the night sky. At night, when the palace finally grew quiet, the hunger changed. In the damp dormitories, the servants would talk about the meals they remembered from their childhood homes. A simple bowl of hot porridge made by a mother. An apple stolen from a neighbor's tree. In their dreams, they didn't crave the royal venison. They craved honest food. Food that was given with love, rather than leftovers given out of obligation. The waste of a palace was perhaps its greatest sin. On festival days, hundreds of dishes would be prepared, only for half of them to be discarded. The silent army watched as perfect jellies and ornate sugar sculptures were scraped into the bins. They saw the abundance that could have fed their entire home village for a year, disappearing into the trash heaps of the wealthy. This sight created a bitterness that no amount of loyalty could ever fully erase. As you listen to the steady, calm pulse of this history, think about your own relationship with plenty. We live in a world of fast food and instant satisfaction. We have forgotten the value of the scrap, the weight of the leftover. The servants of the palace knew the true value of a crust of bread, because they knew the labor that went into every grain. The kitchen is growing dark now. The great iron stoves are cooling, their metal contracted with a soft, ticking sound. The ledgers of the clerk are closed. The broken meat has been consumed. The silent army is retreating to its quarters, their stomachs full of shadows and gray pottage. The palace is a monument to consumption. It is a place where the glory of the meal belongs to the one who sits, and the hunger of the meal belongs to the one who stands. But tonight, you are far from the greed of the royal table. You are in a place of perfect balance. You have no hunger that needs to be satisfied by another's remains. You are full of the quiet, the peace, and the stillness of the night. Feel the contentment in your body. The day's tasks are over. The fires of desire have burned down to ash. You don't need the venison, or the wine, or the gold leaf desserts. You only need the air, and the dark, and the rest. The scent of the lavender in your mind is stronger than the scent of the kitchen. The softness of your pillow is better than the finest silk chair. You are at the table of sleep now, where every guest is equal, and every meal is a dream. The palace is still. The leftovers are gone. The hunger is forgotten. Sleep now. Let the night nourish you. The first light of the morning is a pale, opalescent gray, filtering through the heavy, embroidered curtains of the royal suite. In this hushed, expectant hour, a door clicks open with the softness of a heartbeat. A woman enters. She is dressed in simple, dark wool, her movements so fluid they seem to leave the air undisturbed. She is the lady's maid. Tonight, we enter the most private ritual of the palace. We follow the women who dressed the queens, those who held the power to transform a human being into a living icon. In the theater of royalty, the queen was a goddess, but to her maid, she was a puzzle of laces, pins, and silk. The morning ritual was not a task, it was a ceremony that could take 3 hours to complete. As the queen sits at her vanity, her hair loose and her face tired, she is just a woman. But through the hands of her maid, she will become the state. She will become the crown. Imagine the wardrobe room. It is a labyrinth of cedar-scented chests and towering cupboards. The maid begins by selecting the first layer, the chemise. It is made of the finest, almost transparent linen, so soft it feels like a second skin. Can you hear the sound of the fabric as it is unfolded? A soft, dry whisper, like a secret being told. The maid handles it with reverence, for she knows that she is the only person, other than the queen herself, who will ever touch this layer. Then comes the corsetry. This was the architecture of the royal body. The corset was a cage of whalebone and silk, designed to create a silhouette that defied nature. The maid stands behind the queen, her feet planted firmly on the floor. She takes the long, silk laces in her hands. Pull. Breathe. Tighten. It is a moment of intense physical connection. The queen must endure the pressure, and the maid must apply it with a steady, remorseless hand. In this moment, they are tethered together by a cord of silver. As the layers of petticoats are added, the room begins to fill with the sound of luxury. The rustle. To a commoner, it is just noise. But to the palace, the sound of silk on silk is the sound of power. It is a rhythmic, oceanic sound that follows the queen wherever she goes. The maid kneels on the floor, adjusting the hem, pinning the lace, ensuring that every fold of the heavy brocade falls with the weight of destiny. Think of the jewel box. This was the most dangerous part of the morning. The maid opens the heavy, velvet-lined chest, and the room is suddenly filled with a cold, prismatic light. Diamonds, emeralds, pearls. Each piece has a name. Each piece has a history of blood and glory. The maid handles them with gloves, her fingers steady. She pins a brooch here, drapes a necklace there. She is decorating a statue. She is turning a woman into a treasure. The psychological bond formed in these hours was unlike any other in the palace. Because the maid saw the queen at her most vulnerable, half-dressed, perhaps crying, or complaining of a headache, she became a safe harbor. The queen could say things to her maid that she could never say to her husband, the king, or her ministers. The maid was a living diary. She absorbed the fears and the frustrations of the crown, burying them deep beneath her own quiet exterior. There is a specific scent to this ritual. It is the scent of violet powder and hot irons. The maid uses a small, silver-handled iron to press a stray wrinkle from a sleeve even as the queen is wearing it. The steam rises, mixing with the scent of the queen's perfume. It is a heady, suffocating atmosphere of beauty and labor. The maid's own hands are often burned or pricked by pins, but her face remains a mask of calm. Her pain is invisible. Only the queen's perfection is allowed to be seen. What did these women think about as they spent their lives in the shadow of another woman's glory? They knew the queen's body better than anyone. They knew her scars, her age, her secrets. They lived in a world of borrowed intimacy. They were the closest person to the source of power, yet they held no power of their own. They were the creators of the illusion, and they knew better than anyone how fragile that illusion truly was. As the final layer, the heavy, velvet robe, is draped over the queen's shoulders, the transformation is complete. The tired woman who sat at the vanity has disappeared. In her place stands a queen, a figure of awe and authority. The maid steps back, fading once more into the shadows of the curtains. Her work is done. She has created a masterpiece, and now she must disappear so the world can admire it. But the ritual does not end with the appearance. The maid must then spend the rest of the morning cleaning the wreckage of the transformation. She gathers the discarded pins, she folds the night clothes, she cleans the hair from the silver brushes. She is the curator of the queen's humanity. She ensures that every trace of the woman's private life is erased, leaving behind only the image of the goddess. As you listen to the steady, rhythmic pulse of this morning ceremony, think about the masks we all wear. We all have maids in our lives, the rituals, the clothes, the routines that help us face the world. The story of the lady's maid is a story of the labor of identity. It is a reminder that even the most powerful people are built by the hands of others. The royal bedroom is now empty. The queen has gone to meet her court, the rustle of her silk echoing down the hall. The maid is alone in the quiet, sunlit room. She sits for a moment on a small stool, her back finally relaxing. The air still smells of violets and steam. The palace is a monument to the finished product. But the truth, the real history, lives in the process. It lives in the tension of the laces and the sharp point of the pin. But tonight, you have no masks to create. You have no corsets to lace, no jewels to guard. You are far from the demands of the royal image. You are in a place where you can be exactly who you are, without decoration, without ceremony. Feel the lightness in your own body. The layers of the day have been removed, one by one. You are back to the simplest version of yourself. No silk, no velvet, just the quiet air and the soft dark. The vanity is clear. The brushes are laid aside. The queen is a memory. You are safe in the stillness. You are at peace in the shadows. Sleep now. Let your identity dissolve into the night. In the grand tapestry of palace history, we often look at the giants. The kings who built empires, the generals who won wars, the architects who designed these monolithic walls of stone. But if you look closer, down near the cold floorboards, in the dark corners behind the heavy oak doors, you will find the smallest shadows of all. These were the children of the palace. Boys and girls as young as 7 or 8, who grew up not in nurseries, but in the service of a world that barely saw them. Tonight, we explore the lives of child servants, growing up inside these stone walls. For a child in the 18th or 19th century, entering royal service was like being swallowed by a mountain. Imagine a boy of 7, standing in the great courtyard for the first time. To him, the windows are like giant eyes, and the ceilings are as far away as the clouds. He has been sent away from his family, from the familiar smell of a small cottage, to a place that smells of cold ash, iron, and ancient dust. He is no longer a son. He is a page, a scullery boy, or a link boy. He is a tiny gear in a massive, unfeeling machine. The first thing a child servant learned was the scale of silence. Children are naturally loud. They laugh, they run, they shout. But inside the stone walls, those sounds were forbidden. A child servant had to learn to move like a cat. He learned to suppress his cough, to stifle his giggle, and to walk without making a sound on the marble. This was the death of childhood. The palace didn't want a child, it wanted a miniature adult, someone who could work 16 hours a day without the inconvenience of play. Imagine the scullery maid, a girl of 9. Her world is the floor. She spends her days on her knees, scrubbing the endless stone tiles of the kitchen with a mixture of sand and lye. Can you hear the rhythmic, harsh scrape of the brush against the stone? It is the only music she knows. Her hands, which should be holding dolls or flowers, are red, raw, and swollen from the cold water. She sees the palace from the ground up. To her, the world is a series of booths, hems of dresses, and the legs of tables. The link boys and chimney sweeps had the most dangerous tasks. The sweep, often the smallest boy in the palace, had to climb into the narrow, soot-choked flues of the great fireplaces. He lived in a world of total darkness and suffocating heat. He pushed himself up through the narrow stone throats of the chimneys, his skin turning as black as the coal he cleaned. When he emerged onto the roof, he was a shadow against the sky. He saw the view that the king saw, but he saw it through eyes stinging with ash and a heart pounding with fear. There is a profound loneliness in being a child in a palace. The royals had their own children, princes and princesses who lived in rooms filled with toys, silk ribbons, and golden books. Sometimes, a child servant would catch a glimpse of these royal children through a doorway. They would see a boy their own age, dressed in velvet, playing with a silver hoop. In that moment, the distance between the two children was greater than the distance between the earth and the stars. One was born to be served, and the other was born to be the servant. What did they think about as they lay on their straw pallets at night in the damp cellars? They were surrounded by thousands of people, yet they were utterly alone. They missed the touch of a mother's hand. They missed the sound of a father's voice. Many of them forgot what it felt like to be hugged. They became old souls in small bodies. Their eyes held a weary wisdom, a knowledge of the world's hardness that no child should ever possess. They were the keepers of the palace's foundation, their small hands holding up the weight of the crown. But even in this harsh life, the spirit of a child is hard to extinguish. In the rare moments when the masters were away, a secret world would emerge. A group of boys might race each other down a service corridor. A girl might find a discarded ribbon and tie it into her hair, pretending for 5 minutes that she was the princess. These small acts of defiance were their only way to survive. They found joy in a stolen apple, a kind word from an older cook, or the sight of a bird nesting on a windowsill. Think of the page boy standing behind the throne. He is 10 years old. He must stand perfectly still for hours, his back straight, his expression blank. His legs ache. He is hungry. But he knows that if he fumbles, if he sways, he will be punished. He watches the history of the world unfold before him. He hears the treaties being signed. He sees the anger of the king. He is a silent witness to power, a child who knows more about the reality of the world than the aristocrats he serves. As these children grew up, the palace became their only reality. They didn't know the world outside the stone walls. They didn't know how to live without the sound of the bells or the smell of the tallow. The palace had claimed their childhood, and in return, it gave them a life of service. They became the next generation of the silent army, their hearts hardened like the stone they scrubbed. There is a quiet tragedy in the memory of these children. We walk through the museums today and we see the beautiful architecture, the grand paintings. But we should also see the small fingerprints on the glass. We should see the marks on the floorboards where a child knelt for years. The palace is a monument to their lost innocence. It is a building held together by the quiet endurance of the very young. As you listen to the steady, calm pulse of this story, think about the children of today. Think about the gift of a childhood free from labor. We live in a world that has mostly forgotten the scullery maid and the chimney sweep. But their spirits are still there, in the echoes of the old hallways. They are the ones who remind us that the cost of luxury is often paid in the currency of a child's dreams. The palace is growing dark now. The small, tired shadows are retreating to their corners. The scrubbing brushes have been laid aside. The chimneys are cold. The child servants are finally closing their eyes, drifting into the only place where they are truly free, the world of sleep. In their dreams, there are no stone walls. There are no bells. There are no heavy buckets of coal. There is only the sun, the grass, and the sound of their own laughter echoing in the wind. You are far from the cold stones of the basement. You are far from the demands of the service. You are in a place of safety and warmth. Feel the softness of your own rest. Let the memory of these children remind you to cherish the peace you have tonight. You have no floors to scrub. You have no fires to tend. You are free to be exactly as you are. The night is a gentle blanket. The palace is still. The children are asleep. Sleep now. Let your spirit roam free. In the official ledgers of the royal household, you will find records of wages, lists of liveries, and the cost of every candle. But there is another ledger, one that was never bound in leather or stored in the library. It was a record written in the nerves and the memories of the people below the stairs. This was the ledger of punishment. Tonight, we enter the quietest part of the palace's history. We look at the shadow laws, the punishments that no one ever wrote down, but every servant knew by heart. To live in a palace was to live in a state of constant, silent judgment. In this world, a mistake was not just a human error. It was a stain on the royal dignity. A dropped plate, a smudged mirror, or a whispered word in the presence of a guest, these were the small cracks that the system could not allow to grow. The discipline of the palace was not always about violence. It was about the slow, grinding pressure of being made to feel less than human. Imagine the wall of silence. This was perhaps the most common punishment for a young servant who had spoken out of turn. They were not hit, they were not shouted at. Instead, they were made to face the wall for hours on end, in total isolation. They were forbidden from looking at any human face. The other servants were ordered to treat them as if they had ceased to exist. Can you feel the weight of that stillness? The psychological coldness of being turned into a ghost while your body is still warm? It was a punishment designed to break the spirit, to teach the servant that their only value was their silence. The fines were a different kind of cruelty. A servant's wage was already a pittance, a few shillings a month to be sent home to a hungry family. But for every broken dish, for every ounce of wasted coal, a portion of that wage was clawed back. Imagine the kitchen maid who drops a porcelain tureen. She hears the sharp, crystalline shatter on the stone floor. In that sound, she hears her mother's rent going unpaid. She hears her brother's shoes disappearing. The punishment was not the broken dish, it was the guilt that followed her back to her cold bed. For the outdoor staff, the grooms and the gardeners, the punishments were often physical, but hidden from the royal gaze. They were sent to the hard labor of the palace, the tasks that were unnecessary but exhausting. Moving a mountain of gravel from one side of the courtyard to the other, only to move it back the next day. Scrubbing the moss from the north wall with a toothbrush in the freezing rain. These were the ghost tasks. They served no purpose other than to remind the servant that their time, their energy, and their very bodies belonged to the crown. The steward's gaze was a punishment in itself. The house steward was the judge and the jury of the basement. He didn't need to speak to punish you. He would simply stand in the doorway, watching you work. He would watch for a tremble in your hand, a bead of sweat on your forehead. He would follow you with his eyes, never blinking, never offering a word of praise. The pressure of being watched, of knowing that your every movement was being measured for weakness, created a state of permanent anxiety. It was a psychological leash that never let go. Think of the dismissal without character. This was the ultimate death sentence in the servant's world. To be fired was bad, but to be fired without a character, a letter of recommendation, meant you could never work in a great house again. You were cast out of the golden gates with nothing but the clothes on your back. No one would hire a person who had no character. You were left to the mercy of the workhouse or the streets. This was the silent threat that hung over every bow and every "yes, my lord." The fear of the void outside the palace walls kept the silent army in a state of perfect, terrified obedience. There was a physical toll to the discipline of the standing guard. A footman who moved his eyes during a royal dinner might be ordered to stand in the corridor after the meal was over, perfectly still, for 4 additional hours. Imagine the ache in the knees, the throbbing in the ankles, the way the back begins to scream for a moment of rest. But he must remain a statue. If he slumps, the time is doubled. He becomes a living monument to the master's power, a human being stripped of the right to sit. What did they think about as they endured these unwritten laws? They learned to hide their emotions behind a mask of marble. They learned that their face was not their own. If they were angry, if they were in pain, if they were mourning a loss, it could not show. To show emotion was to show a lack of discipline. To show humanity was to invite punishment. They became experts at the inner scream, a storm of rage and sorrow kept perfectly contained within a silent chest. But even in this world of discipline, there were secret ways of fighting back. A servant might accidentally forget to warm a plate for a particularly cruel master. A groom might take the long way around the park, giving himself 5 minutes of peace in the trees. These were small, dangerous rebellions. They were the only way to remind themselves that they still had a will, that the palace had not claimed every corner of their soul. There is a haunting quality to the silence of the palace today. When we walk through the museum rooms, we don't see the fines or the forced standing. We don't see the tears shed in the dark corners of the pantry. But the walls remember. The stone floors carry the weight of those who were made to stand until they broke. The palace is built on the discipline of the ignored. As you listen to the steady, calm rhythm of this story, think about the invisible rules in your own life. Think about the pressures that keep us in line, the judgments we fear, and the masks we wear to survive. The story of the palace punishments is a story of the human spirit under pressure. It is a reminder of the incredible resilience of those who are told they have no voice. The palace is growing dark now. The house steward has closed his ledger. The servants who were punished today are finally back in their beds, their muscles twitching with the memory of the day's toil. The silence of the night has finally replaced the silence of the law. In their sleep, the walls are gone. There are no fines, no gazes, no forced standing. In the world of dreams, every servant is their own master. Every ghost is given back their voice. You are far from the judgment of the steward. You are far from the weight of the royal gaze. You are in a place of total, beautiful freedom. Feel the relaxation in your own back and shoulders. Let go of the need to be perfect for the world. No one is watching you tonight. No one is measuring your worth. You are free to be soft. You are free to be still. The night is a sanctuary where the laws of the day do not apply. The palace is still. The ledger is closed. Sleep now. Let the quiet protect you. In the life of a palace servant, time was not measured by months or years, but by the intensity of the light. There were days when the palace felt like a sleeping giant, breathing slowly in the gray mist of a Tuesday morning. And then, there were the festivals. The days when the giant woke up, screaming with music, fire, and 1,000 demands. Tonight, we explore the jagged contrast of the servant's calendar. We look at the difference between the festival days and the ordinary days in a life of service. An ordinary day was a cycle of predictable, rhythmic labor. It was the comfort of the known. You woke at the same hour, you polished the same silver, you walked the same 3 miles of stone corridor. There was a meditative quality to the repetition. The silent army moved like the gears of a clock. No one raised their voice. No one ran. The palace was a machine in perfect, quiet equilibrium. The air smelled of beeswax, old dust, and the steady heat of a well-tended hearth. Imagine the ordinary afternoon. The king is away hunting, the queen is writing letters in her morning room. In the basement, the servants might have 20 minutes to sit. The housekeeper might allow a window to be opened, letting in the scent of wet grass and distant birdsong. These were the days when a servant could remember they had a soul. They could feel the stillness of the palace, a heavy, peaceful weight that settled into their bones. It was a life of quiet endurance, but it was a life they understood. But then, the festival arrives. A royal wedding. A Christmas gala. A victory banquet. The change is violent. It begins days before, with the arrival of the provision wagons. Hundreds of crates of exotic fruits, mountains of ice wrapped in straw, thousands of extra candles. The ordinary day is shattered. The silent army is no longer a clock, it is a storm. Every servant is pushed to the absolute limit of human capability. The kitchen becomes a battlefield of steam and shouting. The laundry becomes a frantic sea of white linen and hot irons. Can you hear the difference in the sound of the palace? On an ordinary day, footsteps are muffled whispers. On a festival day, they are a thunderous, constant drumming on the marble. There is no rest. A footman might work 20 hours without sitting down. His livery is tight, his collar is soaking with sweat, but he must stand behind the guest's chair with a face as calm as a summer pond. The contrast is a physical strain that leaves the body trembling in the dark. Think of the great transformation. For a festival, the palace is decorated until it is unrecognizable. Enormous pine trees are brought into the halls, their scent mixing with the smell of roasting meat and expensive perfume. Garlands of holly and ivy are draped over the portraits of ancestors. To the guests, it is a wonderland. To the scullery maid, it is more work. More leaves to sweep. More wax to scrape from the floorboards at 4 in the morning. More beauty to maintain, and more chaos to hide. The festival night is a peak of sensory overload. The music of the orchestra vibrates through the floorboards, reaching down into the damp cellars where the tired workers wait. They hear the laughter, the rhythmic swirl of the dancers, the toasts to the health of the crown. They are the pillars holding up this celebration, but they are invisible to the revelers. They are the ones who must ensure that as soon as a glass is empty, it is refilled. As soon as a candle gutters, it is replaced. But there is a strange, shared energy in these high-pressure days. In the heat of the festival, the usual barriers between servants sometimes soften. A cook and a footman might share a quick, manic laugh over a collapsed soufflé. A sense of us against the world develops. They are the secret engineers of the joy, and there is a fierce, hidden pride in seeing the spectacle succeed. They know that without them, the music would stop and the lights would fail. And then, as quickly as it began, the festival ends. The guests depart in their carriages, the music fades into the night, and the silence returns. The post-festival hangover is perhaps the hardest time of all. The palace is a wreck. The floors are stained with wine and mud. The air is stale, smelling of burnt tallow and dying flowers. While the royals sleep late into the afternoon, the silent army must begin the great cleanup. They must erase the festival. They must turn the wonderland back into an ordinary palace. They work in a state of exhaustion that feels like a heavy, gray fog. The ordinary day returns, but it feels different now. The halls feel larger, emptier. The servants return to their slow, rhythmic tasks, but their bodies carry the memory of the frantic lights. They look at the empty ballroom and remember the swirl of the silk. They go back to their bread and pottage, remembering the scent of the venison they were not allowed to taste. There is a lesson in this cycle of feast and famine. It reminds us that every peak of human celebration is built on a valley of hidden labor. For every hour of royal music, there were 1,000 hours of silent scrubbing. For every flash of a diamond, there was a tired eye watching in the shadows. The palace is a scale, forever balancing the weight of the spectacle against the weight of the service. As you listen to the steady, calm pulse of this story, think about the rhythms of your own life. The busy seasons and the quiet ones. The times when you are pushed to your limits, and the times when you can finally breathe. We all have our festival days, and we all have our ordinary Tuesdays. The palace is growing quiet now. The last pine needle has been swept away. The ordinary silence has reclaimed the corridors. The silent army is back in its rhythmic trance, moving through the gray light of the morning with a steady, familiar grace. You are far from the noise of the banquet. You are far from the exhaustion of the cleanup. You are in the perfect middle, a place of absolute, unmoving peace. Feel the rhythm of your heart slowing down to match the ordinary night. No music, no shouting, no frantic lights. Just the soft, cool air and the weight of your own stillness. The year is turning. The seasons are shifting. But for tonight, there is only this moment. Sleep now. Let the ordinary silence be your sanctuary. In the life of a palace servant, time was not measured by months or years, but by the intensity of the light. There were days when the palace felt like a sleeping giant, breathing slowly in the gray mist of a winter morning. And then, there were the festivals. The days when the giant woke up, screaming with music, fire, and 1,000 demands. Tonight, we explore the jagged contrast of the servant's calendar. We look at the difference between the festival days and the ordinary days in a life of service. An ordinary day was a cycle of predictable, rhythmic labor. It was the comfort of the known. You woke at the same hour, you polished the same silver, you walked the same 3 miles of stone corridor. There was a meditative quality to the repetition. The silent army moved like the gears of a clock. No one raised their voice. No one ran. The palace was a machine in perfect, quiet equilibrium. The air smelled of beeswax, old dust, and the steady heat of a well-tended hearth. Imagine the ordinary afternoon. The king is away hunting, the queen is writing letters in her morning room. In the basement, the servants might have 20 minutes to sit. The housekeeper might allow a window to be opened, letting in the scent of wet grass and distant birdsong. These were the days when a servant could remember they had a soul. They could feel the stillness of the palace, a heavy, peaceful weight that settled into their bones. It was a life of quiet endurance, but it was a life they understood. But then, the festival arrives. A royal wedding. A Christmas gala. A victory banquet. The change is violent. It begins days before, with the arrival of the provision wagons. Hundreds of crates of exotic fruits, mountains of ice wrapped in straw, thousands of extra candles. The ordinary day is shattered. The silent army is no longer a clock, it is a storm. Every servant is pushed to the absolute limit of human capability. The kitchen becomes a battlefield of steam and shouting. The laundry becomes a frantic sea of white linen and hot irons. Can you hear the difference in the sound of the palace? On an ordinary day, footsteps are muffled whispers. On a festival day, they are a thunderous, constant drumming on the marble. There is no rest. A footman might work 20 hours without sitting down. His livery is tight, his collar is soaking with sweat, but he must stand behind the guest's chair with a face as calm as a summer pond. The contrast is a physical strain that leaves the body trembling in the dark. Think of the great transformation. For a festival, the palace is decorated until it is unrecognizable. Enormous pine trees are brought into the halls, their scent mixing with the smell of roasting meat and expensive perfume. Garlands of holly and ivy are draped over the portraits of ancestors. To the guests, it is a wonderland. To the scullery maid, it is more work. More leaves to sweep. More wax to scrape from the floorboards at 4 in the morning. More beauty to maintain, and more chaos to hide. The festival night is a peak of sensory overload. The music of the orchestra vibrates through the floorboards, reaching down into the damp cellars where the tired workers wait. They hear the laughter, the rhythmic swirl of the dancers, the toasts to the health of the crown. They are the pillars holding up this celebration, but they are invisible to the revelers. They are the ones who must ensure that as soon as a glass is empty, it is refilled. As soon as a candle gutters, it is replaced. But there is a strange, shared energy in these high-pressure days. In the heat of the festival, the usual barriers between servants sometimes soften. A cook and a footman might share a quick, manic laugh over a collapsed soufflé. A sense of us against the world develops. They are the secret engineers of the joy, and there is a fierce, hidden pride in seeing the spectacle succeed. They know that without them, the music would stop and the lights would fail. And then, as quickly as it began, the festival ends. The guests depart in their carriages, the music fades into the night, and the silence returns. The post-festival hangover is perhaps the hardest time of all. The palace is a wreck. The floors are stained with wine and mud. The air is stale, smelling of burnt tallow and dying flowers. While the royals sleep late into the afternoon, the silent army must begin the great cleanup. They must erase the festival. They must turn the wonderland back into an ordinary palace. They work in a state of exhaustion that feels like a heavy, gray fog. The ordinary day returns, but it feels different now. The halls feel larger, emptier. The servants return to their slow, rhythmic tasks, but their bodies carry the memory of the frantic lights. They look at the empty ballroom and remember the swirl of the silk. They go back to their bread and pottage, remembering the scent of the venison they were not allowed to taste. There is a lesson in this cycle of feast and famine. It reminds us that every peak of human celebration is built on a valley of hidden labor. For every hour of royal music, there were 1,000 hours of silent scrubbing. For every flash of a diamond, there was a tired eye watching in the shadows. The palace is a scale, forever balancing the weight of the spectacle against the weight of the service. As you listen to the steady, calm pulse of this story, think about the rhythms of your own life. The busy seasons and the quiet ones. The times when you are pushed to your limits, and the times when you can finally breathe. We all have our festival days, and we all have our ordinary Tuesdays. The palace is growing quiet now. The last pine needle has been swept away. The ordinary silence has reclaimed the corridors. The silent army is back in its rhythmic trance, moving through the gray light of the morning with a steady, familiar grace. The festival is just a memory, a flicker of gold in the back of the mind. The night is back to its true, dark self. Feel the rhythm of your heart slowing down to match the ordinary night. No music, no shouting, no frantic lights. Just the soft, cool air, and the weight of your own stillness. The year is turning. The seasons are shifting. But for tonight, there is only this moment. Sleep now. Let the ordinary silence be your sanctuary. In a building made of cold stone and rigid laws, where every minute was owned by a master, you might think there was no room for the heart to breathe. But the palace was not just a monument to power. It was a labyrinth of human souls. And where there are people, there is always the quiet, persistent bloom of affection. Tonight, we walk through the dim, torchlit hallways to find the stories the history books ignored. These are the love stories that began in the palace corridors. To understand love in the palace, you must understand the value of a single second. In the life of the silent army, time was a luxury they did not possess. A footman and a housemaid could work in the same wing for 5 years and never be allowed to stand and talk. Their romance had to be built in the margins. It was a language of the in-between. A glance exchanged while passing on the back stairs. A hand brushed against a sleeve in the crowded pantry. It was a love that lived in the pulses, not the words. Imagine the scullery at midnight. The heavy work is done, the fires are low. A young boy who carries the coal and a girl who scrubs the copper are the only ones left awake. They sit on the edge of a cold stone table, their shoulders almost touching. They don't speak, for speech is dangerous. Instead, he shares a piece of an apple he saved from the afternoon. In that small, crisp fruit, there is a universe of devotion. It is a love of shared burdens, a silent pact to survive the darkness together. The service corridors were the arteries of these secret lives. These narrow, windowless passages were the only places where a couple could steal a moment of humanity. Can you hear the soft, hurried sound of footsteps stopping for just a breath? Behind a heavy tapestry, or in the shadow of a linen cupboard, a valet and a laundry maid might whisper a promise. I will wait for you by the gate on Sunday. I saw you in the gallery today. These fragments of sentences were more precious than the gold on the ceilings. There was a profound bravery in this kind of love. Most palaces had strict rules against followers, the term they used for romantic partners. If a maid was found to be in love, she could be dismissed instantly, cast out without a character. Loving someone was a risk to your very survival. And yet, they loved anyway. They turned the palace into a map of secret meeting spots. The herb garden after the moon rose. The hayloft in the stables when the grooms were asleep. They reclaimed the palace, turning its cold corners into a sanctuary. Think of the language of the bells. A footman might recognize the specific way a maid pulled the wire, a slight hesitation that only he could hear. Or perhaps, when he delivered the mail to the servants' hall, he would place her letter at the bottom of the pile, a tiny signal that he had held it in his hand. These were the ghost signals of the heart. They were invisible to the masters, but to the lovers, they were as loud as the cathedral bells. Often, these stories were tinged with a beautiful, haunting melancholy. A couple might save their pennies for 10 years, hoping to buy a small cottage and leave the palace forever. They lived for a future that was always just over the horizon. They spent their youth polishing the mirrors of the rich, seeing their own aging faces reflected in the silver, while their dreams stayed tucked away in their wooden trunks. Their love was the fire that kept them warm in a building that offered them no hearth. But there were also the successful secrets. The couples who managed to marry in secret, living in the same palace for years without the steward ever knowing. They would pass each other in the halls with blank, professional faces, acting as strangers during the day, only to be husband and wife in the quiet of the night. This was the ultimate victory over the system. To maintain your own world, your own family, right under the nose of the crown. What did they talk about in those few minutes of freedom? They didn't talk about the royals. They talked about the rain. They talked about the smell of the sea. They talked about a world where they wouldn't have to wear a uniform. Their love was an act of remembering. It reminded them that they were not just numbers on a payroll. They were people with names, with histories, and with a capacity to care that the stone walls could never crush. There is a specific scent to these palace romances. It is the scent of damp wool and lavender. It is the smell of two people huddled together in a drafty hallway, finding warmth in the proximity of another soul. It is a scent that lingers in the old, forgotten corners of the great houses today. If you listen closely in the quiet of a museum, you might still hear the echo of a suppressed laugh, or the rustle of a quick, stolen embrace. As you listen to the steady, gentle rhythm of these stories, think about the hidden connections in your own life. The things you say without speaking. The people who understand you in the silence. Love is not always found in the grand gestures or the bright lights. Often, it is strongest in the shadows, in the places where it has to fight to exist. The palace is growing dark now. The torches have burned down to embers. The secret meetings in the corridors are over for tonight. The lovers have returned to their separate dormitories, carrying the warmth of a touch or a whisper back to their cold beds. The night is a keeper of secrets. It protects the memories of those who loved in silence. It holds the promises made behind the velvet curtains. You are far from the rules of the steward. You are far from the fear of discovery. You are in a place where your heart can beat at its own pace. You have no one to hide from. You have no reason to be silent. Feel the peace in your own chest. Let the stories of these resilient souls remind you that warmth can be found even in the coldest of places. You are surrounded by the quiet affection of the night. The corridors are still. The stone is cold, but the memory of the fire remains. The palace is at rest. Sleep now. Let your dreams be a garden where no walls exist. The seasons in the palace do not move like they do in the world outside. Here, time is not marked by the turning of leaves or the falling of snow, but by the slowing of the step. The deepening of the lines on a forehead, and the silver that begins to trace the hair of the silent army. Tonight, we walk through the twilight of a life in service. We look at the quiet, often ignored reality of aging behind the golden doors. What happened when the hands that polished the silver grew too shaky to hold the cloth? To grow old in a palace was to become part of the very structure you maintained. You began to resemble the ancient oaks in the park or the weathered stone of the north wing. For a man who started as a page at 10 and reached 60 as a head valet, the palace was not just a workplace. It was the only map he knew. His knees remembered every one of the 1,000 stairs. His fingers knew the weight of every brass handle. But as the decades passed, the machine that is the palace began to demand more than the body could give. Imagine the aging housemaid. She is 55, her back bent into a permanent curve from 40 years of scrubbing. Her eyes are dim from a lifetime of working by the flickering light of tallow stumps. She moves through the corridors in the early morning, her breathing heavy in the silence. She is a master of her craft, but she is tired. The palace is a relentless master. It does not care that your joints ache in the damp of the cellar. It only cares that the dust is gone and the hearth is warm. There was a profound fear that came with the gray hair. In the 18th and 19th centuries, there was no such thing as a pension for most. Your security depended entirely on the memory of your master. A kind master might allow an aging servant to retire to a small cottage on the edge of the estate, a place where they could sit in the sun and watch the carriages pass, their service finally over. This was the dream. To leave the stone walls and find a patch of earth that was finally, truly, theirs. But for many, the reality was a ghostly presence within the walls. The palace had a way of tucking its elders into the corners. An old cook might be moved to the still room, where the work was lighter. A valet might become a gatekeeper, sitting in a small stone lodge, watching the world come and go. They were kept on as an act of mercy, or perhaps because they held so many secrets that the royals were afraid to let them leave. They were the living libraries of the palace, the ones who remembered the king when he was a crying infant. Can you hear the sound of an old servant's walk? It is a slow, deliberate shuffle on the stone. Scuff. Scuff. It is the sound of a person who has walked enough miles to circle the earth 3 times over, all without ever leaving the same building. They have seen generations of royals born, married, and buried. They have seen the fashion change from heavy velvet to light silk. They are the only constant in a world that is always chasing the new. There is a quiet dignity in this longevity. The aging servant possessed a wisdom that no aristocrat could ever buy. They knew the true face of the palace. They knew that power fades, that beauty is ephemeral, and that the only thing that lasts is the stone. They watched the young, ambitious servants arrive with their bright eyes and quick movements, and they saw their own younger selves in them. They offered no warnings, only a silent, knowing glance. Think of the final dismissal. Sometimes, when a master died, the entire household was dissolved. For an aging servant, this was a catastrophe. To be 70 years old and told to leave the only home you have ever known is a cruelty that the history books rarely mention. They would stand at the golden gates with their single wooden trunk, looking back at the windows they had cleaned for half a century. They were like sailors being cast off a ship in the middle of a dark ocean. What did they think about in their final years? They didn't think about the grand balls or the famous guests. They thought about the small things. The warmth of the kitchen fire on a rainy Tuesday. The taste of a shared cup of tea in the servants' hall. The sound of a friend's laughter echoing in the laundry. Their lives were made of these microscopic moments of humanity, woven into a tapestry of endless labor. There is a specific scent to this aging. It is the scent of lavender and old paper. It is the smell of a life that has been folded neatly and tucked away. If you visit a palace today, you might feel their presence in the quietest rooms. Not as ghosts, but as a residual peace. The feeling that the room is being watched over by someone who has loved it, and cleaned it, and guarded it for a lifetime. As you listen to the steady, rhythmic pulse of this story, think about the elders in your own life. The ones who carry the stories of a world that no longer exists. We are all building our own palaces of memory. We are all working toward our own twilight. The story of the aging servant is a reminder that the value of a life is not measured by the crown you wear, but by the faithfulness with which you lived your days. The palace is growing very dark now. The heavy oak doors are being locked by hands that have done so 10,000 times before. The aging servants are in their beds, their breath slow and shallow, their dreams filled with the sunlight of a summer 50 years ago. The palace is their cradle, and it will eventually be their shroud. The silence of the night is a respectful one. It honors the decades of quiet footsteps. It honors the hands that are finally at rest. You are far from the fear of the future. You are far from the ache of the long years. You are in the present moment, a place where time has no power over you. You have no miles left to walk tonight. You have no silver to polish. Feel the weight of your own history settling into the mattress. Let the years of your own life be a source of comfort, not a burden. You have earned this rest. You have earned this peace. Sleep now. Let the long night carry you home. The final candle has guttered in its silver socket, leaving behind only a thin, ghostly ribbon of white smoke that vanishes into the rafters. The palace has finally surrendered to the night. The music is a memory, the fires are embers, and the great halls are empty. But for one person, the days-long journey is reaching its most significant moment. Tonight, we walk with the servant who is leaving the golden gates for the last time. We explore the transition from the palace of stone to the world of the free. This is the final walk home, after the candles have all burned out. Imagine the heavy, iron-studded service door at the rear of the palace. It is a door that doesn't lead to a garden or a ballroom, but to a narrow, cobblestone alleyway. As the servant steps through it, the air changes. It is no longer filtered by tapestries or scented with expensive oils. It is the raw, cold air of the city, smelling of rain, coal, and the freedom of the open sky. For the first time in 16 hours, there is no bell waiting to ring. There is no master waiting to be served. The sound of the heavy door closing behind you is a sound of finality. Thud. It is a dull, solid sound that echoes in the quiet alley. You stand there for a moment, your feet still throbbing from the miles of marble you have walked. You look up at the palace, and for the first time, you see it from the outside. It looks like a mountain of lightless rock, a giant that is finally sleeping. You realize that you were the one who kept it alive. You were the breath in its lungs, and now you are taking that breath away with you. The walk home is a ritual of decompression. Each step away from the golden gates is a step back into your own skin. As you walk through the quiet, sleeping streets of the town, the uniform feels a little less tight. The invisible leash that connects you to the bell wire begins to fray and snap. You are no longer the footman or the maid. You are simply a human being walking under the stars, moving toward a place where your name is the only one that matters. Can you hear the rhythm of your boots on the cobblestones? Click, click, click. It is a lonely sound, but it is a sound of ownership. These steps belong to you. This time, between the palace and the cottage, is the only hour of the day that is not on the ledger. You watch the moon reflecting in the puddles, and you realize that the moonlight looks exactly the same on a puddle as it does on a royal mirror. The world, in its essence, is a place of equality that the palace tries so hard to deny. Think of the homecoming. The servant's home is often a small, two-room cottage at the end of a long, muddy lane. It is a place of low ceilings and drafty windows. But as you push open the wooden latch, the scent of your own life meets you. It is the smell of dried herbs, old wood, and the people who love you. You sit on a chair that is not made of mahogany, but it is a chair where you are allowed to sit. You drink water from a cup that is not made of crystal, but it is a cup that you do not have to wash for another. There is a profound, quiet victory in this moment. To survive a day in the palace was an act of endurance. To return home with your spirit intact was an act of rebellion. You look at your hands in the dim light of your own small hearth. They are tired, they are scarred, but they are yours. You have given the palace your labor, but you have kept your soul. As the years of these walks add up, they become the true history of your life. Not the banquets you served, but the walks home in the rain. Not the jewels you polished, but the moments of silence under the old oak tree on the way to your door. We often think that history is made of the grand events inside the palace, but the real history of humanity is made in these small, quiet transitions, where the worker returns to their own heart. As you listen to the fading echo of these footsteps, let the story of the silent army settle into your mind like a heavy, beautiful tapestry. We have walked through the kitchens, the laundries, the secret corridors, and the royal chambers. We have heard the bells and felt the weight of the silence. But now, we are at the end. The palace is behind us. The night is open before us. The story of the palace servant is a reminder that beauty is often built on the backs of the invisible. It is a reminder that every crown is held up by 1,000 hands that are never shown in the portraits. It is a story of resilience, of grace under pressure, and of the incredible strength of the human spirit to find light in the deepest shadows. The moral and educational lesson of our journey. As we conclude this exploration of life inside the royal palace, there is a vital lesson that we can carry into our modern lives. The history of the silent army teaches us the virtue of the unseen. We live in a world that is obsessed with being noticed, with being upstairs, with having our names shouted from the rooftops. But the real foundation of the world, the things that actually keep our lives moving, our homes warm, and our society functioning, is the quiet, faithful labor of the invisible. True dignity does not come from the livery you wear or the titles you serve. It comes from the integrity with which you perform your tasks when no one is watching. The servants of the palace taught us that even in a world that tries to make you a shadow, you can still be a light. They remind us to look at the people around us, the ones who clean the streets, the ones who stock the shelves, the ones who keep the night watch, and to recognize that they are the true architects of our comfort. To honor history is to honor the worker. To find peace is to realize that at the end of the day, after the candles have burned out, we all take the same walk home under the same stars. The palace is a silhouette against the coming dawn. The final walk is over. The door to your own sanctuary is closed and bolted. The world of the royals is 1,000 miles away. You are safe. You are home. You are free. Feel the absolute, beautiful stillness of your own bed. No bells. No orders. No masks. Just the quiet breath of a soul that has finished its work. The history of the night is now your own. The shadows are gentle. The rest is earned. Sleep now. Let the palace fade into the mist of time. You are exactly where you belong. Good night.